I'm Leah Monroe, 28, a freelance florist and the youngest of three sisters. The first time I realized something was deeply wrong was when my Uber driver slowed to a crawl outside Eden Hill Chapel and muttered, You sure this is the place? The parking lot was empty. No valet, no usher, no music. Just rows of pale asphalt shimmering in the July heat, and a faint buzz of cicadas hiding in the trees beyond the stone walls. I clutched my bouquet white peonies, hand-tied with cream silk ribbon, and stepped out slowly, heels clicking against the silence. The chapel, nestled between rows of cypress and trimmed roses, stood open but unmanned. My dress caught the wind, and the ribbon fluttered like a flag with no country. I walked toward the entrance, my hand tightening around the bouquet as the doors creaked. Inside, the pews were empty, the altar bare. No candles, no flowers, no priest, no fiancé. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I got the time wrong. A man in a black polo and clipboard emerged from the side door. Ma'am, can I help you? I'm Leah. Leah Monroe. I'm supposed to be getting married here today. At 3. He glanced down at his clipboard, frowned, and shifted his weight. There's no booking for this afternoon. Next event is tomorrow, corporate wellness seminar. I laughed, shaky. That can't be right. We reserved this 8 months ago. I hand-delivered the deposit. Check under Monroe or Daniel Keene. My fiancé. He looked again. No, ma'am. Not on my list. You said, Keene. I nodded. Slowly now. The man winced. Yeah, that name came up yesterday. Someone from the Keene family called to cancel. Said the bride was feeling unwell. Event called off. My throat clenched so fast I barely got out the whisper. No. No one told me that. He looked pained, eyes softening. I'm real sorry, miss. I turned and stepped outside, bouquet trembling in my hands like it might bloom from panic alone. I dialed Daniel, straight to voicemail. I texted, nothing. A soft chime behind me, a message, not from him. It was from Grace, my oldest sister. Please don't make a scene. Leah, it's already done. Go home. That was when the sky seemed to shift. The cicadas stopped buzzing. The heat sank lower into my skin. If you've ever been blindsided like this, if someone made a major decision about your life without including you in the room, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel like you were the ghost at your own wedding too. I didn't leave the chapel. I sat down right on the stone steps. Bouquet laid across my knees like a relic. I felt the silk threads loosening, like my breath. Then I heard a car pull up behind me. I turned. It was Judge Melody Ainsworth, my old client from 3 years ago when I did her daughter's wedding flowers. She stepped out in navy slacks and pearls, looking exactly like a woman who commanded courtrooms for a living. And she looked furious. Leah. Her voice echoed. You were supposed to be married right now. What the hell happened? I stood, trembling. I don't know. I just got here. They canceled without telling me. She looked around the silent chapel, then back at me, and then, without another word, Judge Ainsworth pulled out her phone. I still have my license to officiate, she said, loud enough for the sky to hear. You're not going home like this. A bird startled from the chapel roof. The air stilled, and for the first time all day, the world turned and looked at me. Really looked. I didn't know it yet, but everything was about to shift. Judge Ainsworth didn't ask for permission. She moved with the decisive energy of someone used to fixing things. She pulled open her car's passenger door and gestured for me to get in, the air conditioning already humming like a quiet invitation. I don't think I started. She cut me off. Not unkindly. You're not thinking right now. Leah. You're shocked. And you're in a wedding dress in the middle of nowhere. Let's get you somewhere you can breathe. I hesitated, then sat down, gathering the folds of my dress into my lap. The smell of eucalyptus and gardenia still clung to the bouquet, which now felt less like a symbol of love and more like a joke someone had written in flowers. We drove in silence for several minutes. Every building we passed, the bakery I once made centerpieces for, the post office where Daniel used to pick up packages. The small hill where we once picnicked felt like it had been turned inside out. Nothing looked the same. "Did he call you?" I asked eventually. My voice cracked. "No," she said simply, "but my daughter follows your sister on Instagram. Grace posted a story, change of plans, keeping things intimate, and I just knew." My jaw clenched. "So they all knew. And I didn't." She nodded. "Looks like it." The words wrapped around my ribs and squeezed. We pulled into the driveway of Judge Ainsworth's house, tall hedges, a stone path, soft blue shutters that reminded me of peace I hadn't earned yet. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes like a noise too loud for the kind of heartbreak I carried. Inside, she handed me a glass of water and a soft blanket. "You can sit here as long as you like. Or yell. Or cry. I've got time." I sat, barely holding the glass. "Why would they do it this way?" I whispered. "Why not just tell me?" She leaned forward. "I can't speak for them, but I've seen this kind of thing before. Families who think they're protecting you from a mess when really, they're the mess themselves." I nodded slowly, the truth landing like a slow bruise. I was never really one of them. "You're not alone in that," she said. I looked down at the bouquet in my lap, the ribbon now loose and fraying. "I don't want to go back home." "You don't have to." I blinked at her. "What do you mean?" She smiled, but it was sharp. "You were meant to get married today." "Right. Yes." "And you were dressed for it. Prepared. Heart ready. Intention set." "Yes." "Then why let them cancel your day?" I blinked again. She leaned back and folded her arms. "Why don't we turn this into something they can't erase?" I hesitated. "You mean like, elope?" "No. Not elope. Reclaim. You're not running. You're anchoring." I stared at her, stunned. She smiled, slow and certain. "Do you know where your parents are today?" "They're all at Grace's house. She has the biggest backyard. They're probably having cake and pretending I'm fine with it." Judge Ainsworth raised an eyebrow. "Well, I happen to have an efficient stove in the closet, and I know how to operate a camera. How would you feel about getting married anyway?" To who I said, half laughing, half horrified. She laughed out loud. "To yourself." I blinked. "What?" She shrugged. "I've officiated 3 self-marriage ceremonies in the last 5 years, women promising to live for themselves, not waiting on someone else's yes. Why not do it now? You've got the dress, the flowers, the courage. Let's finish the story your way." I sat still for a long time, the weight of the morning thick around me. But something in her words opened a window in my chest. Maybe it wouldn't be a tragedy. Maybe it could be a turning. I finally said, "If we're doing this, I want it to mean something. I want it to hurt a little, and heal a lot." She nodded. "Then let's do it somewhere that counts." I looked up. "Where?" She grinned. "Their backyard." I stared. "Are you serious as a judge under oath?" She said. "And I'll bring my tripod." An hour later, I was barefoot in the back seat of her car, veil clipped back, bouquet in hand. We parked one street over from Grace's place and walked through the side alley. I could hear them laughing, clinking glasses, music playing low from some Bluetooth speaker. I could see balloons tied lazily to the gate, a big silver banner, a new path for Daniel. Like it was a career move, not a betrayal. I pressed my fingers to the cold gate. My heart hammered. "Are you ready?" Judge Ainsworth asked. I shook my head. "No." Then I nodded. "Yes." We opened the gate. Nobody noticed at first. Then Grace turned. The look on her face shock. Then horror. Then fury was almost enough to make me turn around. But I didn't. I walked in silence to the center of the lawn, where the stone arch from my original wedding plan had been lazily reused for whatever celebration they were throwing now. I stepped underneath it. Judge Ainsworth set the tripod, hit record, and raised her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, loud and firm, "today, we gather for a union long overdue. Leah Monroe, in full clarity and defiance, has decided to marry the one person who will never abandon her herself." Gasps rippled through the group. Daniel stepped forward, pale. "Leah, what are you doing?" I turned to him, calmly. "I'm finishing the day you canceled without me." He looked around, humiliated. "You're making a scene." I smiled. "So were you." Grace hissed from behind her champagne flute. "This is embarrassing." "No," I said, stepping forward. "This is mine." Judge Ainsworth continued. "Leah, do you promise to honor your story, even the broken chapters? To never beg for love you already carry to remain whole, even in their absence?" I whispered. "I do." And in the silence that followed, every single voice vanished. The crowd fell silent. I stood taller. And for the first time, I saw them not as family or lovers or friends, but as witnesses. Witnesses to something real. I stood under the arch they'd used for Daniel's little moving-on celebration, still gripping my bouquet like it was armor. Judge Ainsworth stood beside me, elegant and calm, reading vows written not for a man, not for applause, but for me. For the version of me that had been quietly stitched together in private, patch by patch, through heartbreaks and silences no one had noticed. I heard someone whisper, "Is she serious?" from the crowd. Yes, I was serious. More serious than I'd ever been. Judge Ainsworth raised her voice again. "With this promise, Leah Monroe declares she is no longer waiting. Not for permission, not for approval, and certainly not for closure from those who chose silence over honesty." She turned to me. "Would you like to speak?" I nodded. I took a breath. I didn't shake. "My name is Leah Monroe. I am 28 years old, and today I was supposed to get married in front of people I thought I could trust." I looked around the backyard, pausing to meet each eye that tried to avoid mine. Instead, I showed up alone, in a dress I designed myself. With flowers I arranged at my own kitchen table, and not a single person warned me. I scanned the faces. My mother flinched. My aunt dropped her fork. I've been told my whole life to stay quiet when things feel wrong, to smile when I'm scared, to be grateful for whatever crumbs fall off the family table. I held up the bouquet. This is not a cry for attention. This is attention. Mine. On me. For once. A strange thing happened then. Someone clapped. Softly at first, then a second person. I think it was my cousin Olivia. Her eyes were wet. But others just stared like they were watching a slow-motion train crash. I didn't care. I deserve better, I said. And today, I choose to give that to myself. I am not mourning the loss of a wedding. I am celebrating the return of my voice. There was nothing dramatic about how I finished. No sob, no scream. Just a clear step forward as Judge Ainsworth pronounced the vow. And so, by the power vested in me by the state, and by the deep knowing of your own worth, I now pronounce you yourself. She smiled. You may now hold your ground. I smiled back. Gladly. I stepped down from the arch and felt the click of my heels on the stone like thunder in my bones. I walked past Daniel, who tried to grab my wrist. His grip weak. Panicked. Leah, please. We didn't want to hurt you. We thought this was best. You don't get to decide that, I said. He looked stunned, small, and for the first time, I realized how little space he'd taken up when I wasn't trying to stretch around him. Then I passed Grace. She crossed her arms. What now? You want applause? I stared her down. No, I want honesty. Something you've never been able to give. Everything was falling apart. Leah, you couldn't see it. We were trying to help. Help would have been telling me the truth, not hijacking my life and locking me out of it. She scoffed. It's not always about you. I leaned in, but it was this time, and you made sure I wasn't there for it. Her lips pressed thin, but she didn't speak. Judge Ainsworth collected the camera, folded up the tripod, and gave me a wink. Well, that's a wrap, she whispered. I exhaled, sharp and slow. And then, with no goodbyes, I turned toward the gate and walked out of my own ambush party. The sky had turned a deep violet, cicadas buzzing like static behind the trees. I walked barefoot, heels in one hand, bouquet in the other. I didn't cry. Not yet. When we got back to her house, Judge Ainsworth handed me a glass of lemonade and a slice of cake, ironically. The wedding cake I had ordered weeks ago and had sent to her office for safekeeping until the venue was ready. She'd kept it in her freezer. Just in case. It's not much, she said, but it's yours. I sat at her kitchen table and took a bite. It was lemon lavender. I had chosen it because it reminded me of something simple and real, like walking through my grandmother's garden barefoot. No pretense. I looked up at her. Why did you help me today? She didn't hesitate. Because no one helped me when I needed it. And because you asked with your eyes, even if you didn't use words. I let her words settle in the silence. She continued. You don't need to explain what happened. Not to anyone. You showed up. That's more than most people can say. I nodded. I don't know what to do now. She sipped her tea. You live, and when you're ready, you forgive yourself for ever thinking their silence was your fault. That night, I slept in her guest room. I didn't open social media. I didn't return calls. I didn't respond to the emails titled, "Can we talk?" or "Just checking in," or "We didn't mean to exclude you." They didn't get to erase what they did with clever wording and soft guilt. In the morning, I packed my things into a small duffel and slipped the wedding dress into its bag. The bouquet, now a little wilted, still smelled like home. As I zipped up the bag, Judge Ainsworth stepped in, holding a small white envelope. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled. "A marriage certificate. You signed it yourself." Remember, I opened it. Inside was a photograph from the ceremony, me standing under the arch, eyes wide and bright, one hand lifted to the sky, alone, glorious. "It's official," she said. "You belong to you." I laughed, quietly. "That's the best wedding gift I've ever gotten." She smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "It's the only one you'll never lose." Before I left, I turned to her at the door. "Do you think they'll ever understand what they did?" She paused. "Maybe. Maybe not. But it's not your burden to carry. Their understanding is not your salvation." I nodded, absorbing that. Then I hugged her, tightly. "Thank you," I whispered, "for showing up. Anytime, sweetheart." She said, "Now go make your life." I stepped out into the morning light. The world felt sharper, newer. I didn't know where I was headed next, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. I had already chosen myself. I took the long way home, Not the literal one, my apartment was a short drive from Judge Ainsworth's house, but the kind of long way that made me stop at every red light a little longer than necessary. Roll the windows down even though the air was hot, and pull into a gas station not because I needed fuel, but because I needed a second to breathe without anyone expecting me to speak. The wedding dress sat quietly in the back seat, draped across a garment bag that still smelled faintly of jasmine and starch. I hadn't decided what I'd do with it. Donate it, burn it, rework it into curtains and call it performance art. For now, it just sat there soft and ghostly, like a version of me that never got to be real. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, my phone buzzed with another call. Mom. I let it ring, then ring again. By the fifth missed call, she switched to texting. Please let us explain. It was a misunderstanding. You're overreacting. And then, finally, Grace is very upset. You embarrassed her. I laughed out loud, bitterly. I was the one standing in a silent chapel, and Grace was the one who deserved sympathy. No one had checked if I was breathing. They had checked if their reputations were intact. I shoved the phone into the drawer next to my bed and left it there. That night, I lay on top of my covers in a tank top and loose cotton pants, eyes wide open. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt heavy, like my body had aged 10 years in 2 days. There was something unspeakable about grief when it wasn't tied to death, when the loss was still walking around and posting brunch photos. I slept in patches, like a child afraid of waking up to the same nightmare twice. The next morning, I got up before the sun and walked to the flower market. Not to buy anything, just to watch the vendors. I'd been a regular there for years, always picking blooms for clients' roses, dahlias, hydrangeas, the occasional calla lily when I felt brave. But that morning, I bought nothing. I just watched the men stack buckets of peonies and the women strip stems with bare, practiced hands. It was quiet there, honest. Nobody pretended not to see you. Later, I stopped by the studio I sometimes rented for small workshops. I had a key. It was tucked behind a loose brick near the door, a trick passed down from the last tenant who swore it was a sacred hiding spot for creatives in crisis. I let myself in, flicked on the lights, and breathed in the familiar mix of eucalyptus, glue, and something faintly sweet like old birthday cake and dried lavender. I stood in the center of the room, spun slowly, and whispered aloud, "What now?" The walls didn't answer, but the silence felt less punishing than before. I pulled the dress from its bag and laid it over the work table. It was ivory satin, fitted at the waist, with embroidered vines along the hem. I ran my fingers over the threadwork and thought about all the hours I spent planning something that never came. Then I picked up a pair of fabric shears. Not with violence, with precision. I didn't rip. I didn't tear. I just began to separate. First the sleeves, then the skirt, then the delicate beading from the bodice. Each piece I folded neatly, stacked carefully, as if I were preparing a gift. And in a way, I wasn't destroying the dress, I was setting it free. I'd always thought of flowers as alive, as entities that react to the hands that touch them. Maybe fabric is the same. Maybe it remembers when it was sewn with love and when it was worn with dignity. By mid-afternoon, I had transformed the dress into lengths of ribbon, patches of lace, and 2 bouquet wraps I'd be proud to offer to any bride, especially one who might be standing where I had stood. Unsure, unseen. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. Around dusk, my phone buzzed again. Not a family member this time. A client. An old one. Actually Jenna Strauss, who I hadn't heard from since I did her engagement party flowers last fall. Hey Leah. Weird question. Do you still do intimate weddings? Small spaces? Something poetic but not too fussy. I stared at the message, stunned. I typed back. Slowly. I do. Are you asking for yourself? Her reply came seconds later. No. For my sister. She's eloping Sunday. She doesn't want fanfare. Just flowers and someone who understands quiet things. I bit my lip, then typed, I'm your girl. It was the first time I felt that tug again, the one that said, maybe, just maybe. My life hadn't stopped, that there were still people out there who knew how to ask gently. On Sunday, I packed the ribbons I had made from my wedding dress. I wrapped Jenna's sister's bouquet in them, never saying a word about where they came from. Just a soft smile and a quiet nod when she touched them and said, these feel like something old and something brave. That day, I stood behind a curtain of ivy in a rooftop garden, listening as vows were exchanged in whispers. I didn't flinch. I didn't ache. I just smiled. Later that evening, as I walked back to my car with the last bucket of stems, I noticed a message in my inbox. From Grace. You could have handled that privately. Leah, you humiliated the family. Daniel is shattered. And then, at the end, I don't know if we'll ever be able to come back from this. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, without typing a single word, I deleted it. I walked to my car, started the engine, and let myself believe, if only for that moment, that maybe I didn't want to come back. Because maybe I wasn't the one who had left. Maybe I was the one finally arriving. The first time someone recognized me from the backyard video. I was wrist-deep in a vase full of muddy water. It happened at a Tuesday morning floral workshop I was teaching for a local women's shelter, a quiet, sacred thing I did twice a month. Most of the women there were like fractured mirrors, beautiful in strange and jagged ways, unsure of what they still reflected. I was rearranging peonies when a soft voice behind me said, "Were you the woman who married herself?" I turned. She was about 40. With dark roots grown halfway down her scalp and a violet bruise along her left jawline. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes were wide, focused. I gave a soft nod. She tilted her head. That was the bravest thing I've seen in a long time. I smiled, unsure of what to say. It wasn't brave at the time. It was survival. She nodded slowly. Yeah, but you look like you meant it. That stayed with me all day. And when I got home, I finally watched the full video for the first time. Judge Ainsworth had edited it gently. No dramatic cuts, no filters, just raw, steady footage. Me walking through that iron gate. Me standing under the arch. Me saying I do to myself without trembling. It was strange to see yourself in a moment you thought you'd blacked out from. I looked taller than I remembered. Not literally something about my posture, the straightness of my shoulders, the way I held my bouquet like it was a sword I had no intention of lowering. The next morning, I posted the video, not with hashtags, not with some glittery caption about empowerment or revenge, just a quiet line. They canceled my wedding without telling me, so I showed up anyway, for myself. And then I logged off. By evening, it had 16,000 views. By the end of the week, over 400,000. Messages began flooding in, not from strangers asking for gossip, but from people who had been left out of their own stories. Forgotten brides, unseen daughters, women whose names were removed from leases, wills, and invitations with surgical precision. Your video made me cry. I didn't know I was allowed to grieve something no one else saw. I watched it 3 times. The way you said "I do it" made me feel less invisible. I canceled my own wedding 2 weeks ago, and nobody showed up for me. Until you. I never responded with much. Just hearts. Or a short, "You were never alone." But one message stood out. You made me wonder what it would look like if I chose myself. What would I wear? What would I promise? What would I leave behind? I copied it onto a note card and pinned it above my desk. That week, I got more flower orders than I'd seen in 3 years. But they weren't traditional. One woman wanted a bouquet to throw in the ocean after leaving her fiancé. Another ordered sunflowers for her own birthday to remind myself I'm still growing. A mother requested a wreath to hang over her daughter's bed. She's recovering from a broken heart. I want her to wake up and see proof that she's still blooming. Each of them, in some way, had married themselves. Quietly, in kitchens and bedrooms and sidewalks, with no judge present, no vows written on paper. But I saw them, and they saw me. It was the first time I felt like my work was doing something other than looking pretty in pictures. A month passed before Daniel tried to contact me again. This time, he didn't text. He showed up at the studio. I was in the middle of tying silk ribbons around a set of corsages when I looked up and saw him in the doorway. His hair was longer than before, face thinner. He looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't been sleeping under the comfort of his own decisions. "Leah," he said quietly. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't ask him in. I just leaned against the table and waited. He sighed. I messed up. We messed up. Grace got in my head. My parents, they thought we were rushing things. They kept saying you didn't really want this. I stayed silent. He continued. When Grace offered to handle the cancellation, I let her. I didn't fight. I should have told you. I know that. I stared at him. You let someone else unchoose me, and then you watched me walk into an empty chapel alone. His eyes filled. I couldn't face you. I was ashamed, but not ashamed enough to stop them. He winced. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought, maybe you'd be better off. That's not your choice, I said. He looked down. I saw the video. He whispered, you were radiant, strong. I didn't recognize that version of you. It scared me a little. I nodded, because she didn't need your permission. He looked up at me. Finally. Is it too late? I didn't raise my voice, didn't flinch. It's not too late for you to change, but it is too late for us. Silence fell, heavy, but not cruel. He nodded slowly, then stepped back toward the door. I hope you find someone who chooses you every day, he said. I smiled. I already did. He left, and for the first time, I felt no weight pressing against the edges of that goodbye. That weekend, I got a letter in the mail from Grace. Not a message, not an email. A letter, handwritten. It was short. I don't agree with how you handled it, but I'm starting to understand why you had to. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. Maybe one day we'll talk again. Until then, I hope you're doing better than we ever let you. No signature, just her handwriting. Slanted, sharp, familiar. I folded it gently and placed it in the back of my journal. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but something like recognition. That night, I sat on my balcony, feet tucked beneath me, sipping mint tea. The stars were sharp, scattered like confetti that hadn't been cleaned up yet. I thought about all the weddings I might still witness in this life, the ones I might arrange flowers for, the ones I might stand beside as friend, or artist, or stranger, and maybe, one day, as a bride again. But this time, it wouldn't start with an invitation. It would start with a mirror. And the same promise I made under that arch, that no matter who walked toward me or away from me, I would never leave myself standing alone again. 2 months passed before I heard from my mother. Not a call, not even a voice note. Just a plain white envelope left at my doorstep one rainy afternoon, wrapped in a clear sandwich bag to keep it dry. No return address, just my name, handwritten in blocky, deliberate letters. Inside was a photo, Me, age 5, sitting on the floor of our old living room, surrounded by paper flowers. I'd cut them myself, carefully taping the petals into uneven blooms, all crooked and lopsided. I was smiling up at the camera like I'd invented the sun. Behind me was my mother, standing in the doorway. She wasn't smiling. The caption on the back, scribbled in my sister's handwriting, read, "She's always been like this. Too much, too delicate, too loud." I sat with that photo in my lap for a long time, staring at my tiny hands gripping those paper flowers like they were more real than anything else in the room. I remembered making them. I remembered my mother's voice when I'd asked her to help. "Not now. Leah, I don't have time for your little projects." It hadn't sounded cruel, just tired, dismissive, but it had stayed with me. Every time I picked up scissors, or touched silk ribbon, or tried to make something beautiful, I folded the photo and slipped it into the back of my desk drawer. Not out of anger, but to remember. Because I was finally realizing how much of my life had been shaped by people who found my softness inconvenient, and I wasn't willing to shrink anymore to make space for their comfort. That weekend, I hosted my first community self-vow ceremony. It wasn't my idea. A woman named Imani reached out to me via Instagram. She was a social worker, 34, with a small following and a huge heart. "Would you ever consider doing a group ceremony, something for women to reclaim their stories together?" The idea struck something deep in me. We rented a loft downtown, bare brick walls, windows that bled golden light, and enough space for 20 chairs in a circle. We lit candles, set a table with flower crowns and fresh-cut blooms. No music, no decorations, just space, clean, open, honest. When the women arrived, they moved softly, almost cautiously, as if unsure whether they were allowed to belong there. But by the time the circle closed, they were no longer strangers. One by one, they stood and read vows not to a partner, but to themselves. I vowed to stop apologizing for taking up space. I promised to stop editing my joy to make others feel more comfortable. I will love the version of me that wakes up afraid and still moves forward. There were tears. There was silence. There was the kind of clapping that doesn't come from politeness, but from a shared ache, finally given a name. I didn't speak during the ceremony. I just handed out the flower crowns. But at the very end, as we were cleaning up, one of the younger women came to me, maybe 23, shy, with fading purple dye in her hair, and asked, "When you married yourself, did it feel real?" I thought about it, then nodded. "More real than anything else I've ever done." She smiled. "Then I think I might try it, too." That night, I walked home with cold fingers and warm lungs. The city was quiet, lit by slow, blinking traffic lights and the hush of late trains. I felt grounded, not triumphant, not transformed, just still, like a river no longer fighting its own direction. The following week, I was sitting on the floor of my studio, sorting through leftover eucalyptus branches, when the door creaked open. I looked up, expecting a client. Instead, it was my father. I hadn't seen him since the non-wedding. He stood there awkwardly in his work boots, holding a small cardboard box. "Hey, kiddo." I swallowed. "Hey." He glanced around the room like he was searching for something to rest his hands on. I figured you might want these," he said, placing the box on the table. Inside were old photo albums, birthday cards I'd made for him in crayon, and a folder full of every article or mention of my flower work from the last 5 years. I blinked. "You kept all this?" He nodded. "Didn't always know how to say it, but I was proud of you. Still am." I ran a hand along the edge of the box, feeling each photo like a pulse. Then why didn't you show up for me? He sighed, sat down across from me, slow, like someone finally ready to carry his weight. Because I didn't know how to pick sides. And because your mother, she didn't want a scene. I stared. I wasn't a scene. I was your daughter. His eyes welled. I know. I failed you. Silence filled the studio. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. Found this in the glove box last week. From when you were 12, you'd written a business plan on the back of a restaurant receipt. Leah's Flower Castle. Custom bouquets for sad people. I laughed, startled. He smiled. You've always known what people needed before they did. I nodded, tears stinging now. I needed you that day. Dad. He nodded too. I'm here now. I know it's late, but if there's room for me, I'd like to help you build the castle. I looked at the table, at the faded napkin, at the flowers I hadn't yet arranged. And I whispered, then start with these. He helped me trim the stems. He didn't talk much after that, but he didn't leave. And maybe that was enough. Later that night, I sat down and made a list. Not of tasks, not of goals, but of promises. Simple ones. I will no longer wait for others to name what I already know I am. I will say no without guilt, and yes, without fear. I will allow myself to grieve the wedding that never was and celebrate the woman who rose from its ashes. I will not explain my softness to those who find it strange. I will keep showing up. For others. For me. When I finished, I wrote the date in the corner and tucked it inside a book of pressed violets. The same book I'd started when I was 17 and dreaming of something bigger than my bedroom. It still smelled like spring. It still reminded me that delicate things survive, too. Autumn arrived with its usual kind of mercy-cool winds, softer light, leaves breaking free like they'd finally made peace with falling. The studio stayed busy, busier than I expected. Honestly, I had no marketing plan, no new logo, no business coach whispering trends into my ear. Just the video, still quietly circulating, still finding new corners of the internet, still showing up in the lives of people who weren't sure how to name their pain until they saw mine stitched into ceremony. One afternoon, I was tying together a sympathy arrangement for a woman whose mother had passed in her sleep. When the bell above the studio door gave its familiar jingle, I didn't turn immediately. But then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in almost 6 months. Leah. Grace. I straightened slowly, fingers still wrapped around a white ribbon. She stood just inside the doorway, holding a pie. Of all things. Apple. Probably from that overpriced organic place she always swore by. I didn't know what to bring, she said quickly, before I could speak. So I brought sugar. I stared. You brought a pie to a woman you disinvited from her own wedding. She winced, but nodded. Fair. The silence was thick, not hostile, just old, like it had been waiting in a corner this whole time. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside, closed the door. She walked in slowly, glancing at the rows of dried hydrangeas on the wall, the vases stacked by color, the fading light spilling through the windows like golden thread. I like what you've done with the place, she said. I shrugged. I just made it more honest. She put the pie down on the table and leaned against the counter. I watched the full video, she said, 3 times. I didn't answer. I didn't know it would go viral. I thought maybe a few hundred people would see it. Not millions. That's because you never really saw me. Grace. She bit her lip. I think I did, but I didn't understand you. I thought your softness was a liability. I thought if I didn't push you, you'd never stop making flower crowns and waiting for someone else to love you loud enough. I stared at her, and instead, you took the loud away before I could even speak. She nodded. I did. More silence. Then she sighed. The truth is, I was jealous. I blinked. What? She looked up, eyes red. You loved without armor. You wanted things openly. You let yourself believe in tenderness. I never learned how to do that. I built my life around control and distance. And when I saw you about to marry someone who didn't love you the way you deserved, it scared me. So you decided to fix it without me? I didn't want to watch you walk into a trap, she said. But I also didn't trust you enough to believe you'd see it yourself. I shook my head. That's not love, Grace. That's arrogance. She nodded, shame in every inch of her body. I know that now. I folded my arms. So what do you want? She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, pale green, sealed with wax. I'm renewing my vows, she said. To myself. Next week. Quiet. Backyard. No guests. Just me. A mirror. And whatever dignity I have left. I stared at the envelope. And you want me to? What approve? No, she said. I want to ask if you'll make the flowers. The room went still. I didn't speak. She continued. Only if you want to. Only if it wouldn't hurt you. I thought about it. About the little girl in the photo, surrounded by crooked paper flowers and no applause. About the woman under the wedding arch, saying I do with a judge and a broken heart. About the 100 bouquets I'd made since then. Each one an apology to a version of me I used to be. And then I nodded. I'll make them, but I won't make them soft. I won't make them easy. Grace smiled. Just a little. Good. I don't need easy anymore. The day of her ceremony, I delivered the bouquet to her front door. It was thorny on purpose. Blood-red ranunculus, dried black scabiosa, wild roses with their edges curled like secrets. No filler flowers, no baby's breath, just depth, just weight. She took it in both hands, studied it like it might teach her something. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's honest, I said. She looked up. Will you stay just in the yard? You don't have to come close. I hesitated, then nodded. She walked out barefoot, standing in the center of the grass, facing an old mirror propped up on a chair. The wind picked up. She held the bouquet tightly, closed her eyes, and whispered her vows to the glass. I couldn't hear every word, just fragments. I will stop making myself harder to survive you. I will allow the version of me I buried at 12 to come back. I will not ask my reflection to apologize anymore. When she was done, she kissed the petals, gently, and laid the bouquet at the base of the mirror like an offering. Then she turned to me, eyes shining. Thank you, she said. For what? For letting me become someone you might forgive. I didn't answer, but I didn't walk away either. That night, back in my apartment, I sat cross-legged on my rug, sorting through leftover stems. Something in me had shifted, not healed, not erased, but expanded, because forgiveness wasn't something you gave to people when they asked. It was something you gave to yourself when you were ready to stop carrying their weight in your ribs. I picked up my old wedding photo, the one Judge Ainsworth had printed for me. Me, standing under that arch, holding the bouquet like a torch. And I whispered, just once, thank you. Thank you for not showing up. Thank you for forcing me to arrive on my own. Thank you for abandoning me, so I could choose myself without compromise. And then I picked up my notebook, flipped to the page labeled Someday, and wrote, Idea host an annual vow renewal for women who never got to be the bride. No white dresses, just real ones. No silence, just voice. No applause, just presence. Call it the Garden of No Permission. I stared at the page for a long time and smiled. Not because I had arrived, but because I knew, for once, the next step would come from me, and no one could cancel that. The first seed of the garden of no permission took root on a damp December morning, in the middle of a power outage. The lights had gone out halfway through a bouquet prep, and I was alone in the studio, surrounded by buckets of dahlias and dripping eucalyptus. It was the kind of silence that usually feels eerie, but that morning, it felt fertile, like something was waiting to emerge from it. I lit 3 tall white candles, pushed my sleeves up, and started arranging in the dark. That's when the idea became a plan. Not just an annual event, but a ritual, a gathering for women who had been talked over, left behind, stood up, silenced, or simply taught to wait. I would invite them to wear whatever made them feel real, not regal, not impressive. Real. No pageantry, no microphones. Just open space, living things, and words that didn't need to be perfect, only honest. And flowers. Of course. Wild ones. Native ones. Strange ones. Ones that had grown from stone cracks in backyards and city sidewalks. Because those were the kind of women I was doing this for. I didn't have a venue, or a budget, or help. But I had names of women who'd written to me over the past few months. Women who'd seen the video, who'd come to the studio, who'd whispered in corners of shelter basements or floral workshops, "I think I need to say something," to myself. I created a form, nothing fancy, just a name, a paragraph, and a checkbox. Would you like to vow to yourself in front of others? I sent it out quietly. No fanfare, no announcement. By the end of the week, I had 72 responses. By the next, 150. So I rented the greenhouse behind the old art museum, the one with the cracked glass roof and vines that grew through the floorboards. It wasn't pristine, but it was honest, alive, and it could hold about 50 people. I capped the list at 40. I invited everyone to bring a single item, an object they once thought they had to let go of to survive. Something small. A letter they never sent. A ribbon. A toy. A dress. A broken bracelet. A journal entry. A pair of shoes they stopped wearing when someone told them they looked too loud. The day of the gathering. The city was soaked in mist. I arrived early with boxes of flower crowns, rough-cut stems, and wooden benches borrowed from my father's workshop. He was there too, quietly hammering the last plank into place. His sleeves rolled up, sawdust in his hair. "You nervous?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I'm ready." He nodded. "That's my girl." By noon, the greenhouse was full. The women arrived slowly, wrapped in shawls and scarves, hands clutching tiny boxes or worn paper envelopes. Some were alone. Some came in pairs, clinging to each other like sisters who'd been lost in the same forest and had finally found a clearing. We began in a circle, always a circle, no stages, no spotlight. I stepped forward and welcomed them with one line. "No one here is waiting to be chosen anymore." A murmur moved through the space like warm breath. Then I stepped back, and they stepped forward, one by one. They walked into the center of the circle and placed their objects on a low table wrapped in linen, a yellowing ballet shoe, a journal burned around the edges, a torn wedding veil folded into a perfect square. I gave up dancing because he said it wasn't practical. I burned my own writing because my mother read it out loud and laughed. I wore that veil the day he left. No one clapped. No one winced. We just witnessed. Then came the vows. Not recited. Spoken. In their own words. Bare. Sometimes stuttering. Sometimes shaking. I vow to eat slowly. Like I'm not afraid of being seen. I promise to stop pretending I'm not lonely when I am. I forgive myself for all the times I stayed just to be useful. Tears fell. Shoulders relaxed. Hands found each other. When it was my turn, I didn't speak long. Just this. I used to think I had to be chosen to be real. But I've learned that reality doesn't begin when someone else names you. It begins the moment you stop waiting. Then I walked to the table and placed the one object I'd been carrying since summer, the original bouquet ribbon from my canceled wedding. Frayed, wrinkled, but still soft, still whole. I tied it gently around the others. When the final vow was spoken, we sat in silence for several minutes. You could hear the wind whistle through the cracked glass above us. You could hear breathing slow, steady, grounded. And when we stood again, it was not with celebration. It was with clarity. Each woman took home a bouquet handmade by me and the 2 volunteers who had helped me tie stems in the back room for hours. No 2 arrangements were alike, just like none of us were. The next day, I posted a single photo online, the table of objects, each one wrapped in a ribbon, and one caption: "We are not broken, we are returned." The response was immediate. Dozens of comments, hundreds of shares. Then the messages poured in. "Will you do this in my city? Can I bring my daughters next time? Do I have to be healed first to join?" And the one that made me cry on the kitchen floor at midnight: "I'm ready." I just didn't know there was a place I could go. By spring, I had scheduled 3 more gatherings. One in Portland, one in Atlanta, one in a reclaimed barn outside Chicago. I still worked with flowers. I still taught quiet classes. I still made wedding bouquets, though now I asked every bride to include one bloom just for herself. No explanation required. I didn't become famous, but I became found. By people who spoke my language. By women who knew what it meant to be left out of the story and write themselves back in. And one night, in the garden behind the greenhouse, I stood barefoot among the weeds, staring at the moon rising slow over the glass roof, and whispered out loud, "I didn't lose a wedding. I lost the version of myself who thought I needed one to be whole." The wind brushed past me like a nod. The trees didn't clap, but I felt seen. And it was enough. I didn't expect the news crew. It was early summer, 3 weeks after the Chicago gathering, and I was in the middle of a solo bouquet session at the studio, hands covered in pollen, earbuds in, humming along to a cover of "Dog Days Are Over" when the bell above the door chimed. I wiped my hands and looked up to see a woman in a navy blazer and low heels standing just inside the threshold, flanked by a cameraman and a young producer with a clipboard. "Hi. You must be Leah Monroe," she said, already smiling. "I'm Kara from Channel 4. We've been following your story. We were hoping to ask a few questions, maybe film a short piece about your vow gatherings if you're open." I blinked, still holding a half-tied bouquet of delphiniums. "You're here now. No heads up. We sent an email last week." The producer chimed in, sheepish. "Maybe it went to spam." I couldn't help but laugh. That feels like a metaphor. They chuckled politely. Kara stepped closer, her tone softening. "We've interviewed 5 women who attended your garden gatherings." One of them said, "I didn't know I had permission to exist until I heard Leah speak." That stayed with us. I put the bouquet down slowly. It stayed with me too. They ended up filming that afternoon. Not a sit-down interview, just B-roll. Slow shots of me arranging petals, trimming stems, wiping dust from the windowsill. Kara asked quiet questions from off-camera. About the moment I stood alone in Grace's backyard. About what it felt like to say I do without applause. About why people were traveling across the country to sit in circles and whisper vows into open air. I told her the truth. I think we're all just waiting for someone to hand us a mirror and say, "You don't need to wait anymore. This is already yours." The segment aired 3 days later, 3 minutes long. No dramatic music, just images of flowers, old objects laid on linen, and one line from me, quiet and steady. The vow isn't a declaration. It's a return, and you don't have to be healed to come home. I didn't expect it to go viral again, but it did. Not in the millions this time, but just enough to tip everything sideways again. My inbox overflowed, not just with messages but invitations. A university wanted me to guest speak at a women's trauma and ritual class. A poet from Montreal asked to collaborate on a chapbook of vow stories. A small press in Portland offered to publish a guidebook if I was interested, not a memoir. They wrote, but something more like a lantern. And then, late one night, I received an email I never expected. Subject line from Judge Ainsworth. I opened it slowly. Leah, I've watched what you've built. I knew you had this in you, but watching it bloom has been something else entirely. I'm retiring next year. Quietly. No party. No speeches. But if you'd consider it, I'd like you to speak at the closing session of my last judicial retreat. Just a short talk. Nothing fancy. About vows. About dignity. About what it means to stand for yourself when no one else will. I can't think of anyone better to remind a room full of lawyers and lawmakers what a promise really means. Yours, Melody Ainsworth. I reread it 3 times, then whispered, out loud, full circle. The retreat took place in a quiet forest lodge an hour north of the city. Wooden beams, fire pits, leather chairs softened by time. I arrived in a linen dress and boots, my hands shaking just a little. Melody greeted me with a firm hug. You nervous? I nodded, terrified. She smiled. Good. That means you care. I stepped up to the podium just before sunset. 40 judges, not one flower in sight. I told them about the vow that wasn't heard, about the silence that followed, about the ritual that bloomed from the wreckage. I stood alone that day, and I thought it meant I had failed. But it turns out, that kind of silence is fertile. It grows things, if you let it. They didn't clap right away. They just sat with it. And when they finally did, it wasn't polite applause. It was slow, deep, like something old had cracked open inside the room. Melody took my hand afterward and said, You didn't just change your story. You rewrote the rules. Back home, I started preparing for the next gathering, this time in a rural orchard in Vermont. Late August, apple trees, fog, dozens of women already registered. But then something strange happened. One night, I found myself sitting in bed with a journal I hadn't opened in years. It was from when I first moved in with Daniel. The entries were small, self-conscious, full of edits and question marks. He's distant again. Maybe I said too much. Grace said the napkins I chose were tacky. Should I change them? I cried today, but didn't tell him. It would have made things worse. Page after page of doubt. Shrinking. Rearranging myself to make others more comfortable. I closed the journal gently and placed it in the bottom drawer of my nightstand, not out of shame, but because that version of me was no longer writing this story. The night before the Vermont gathering, I sat on the orchard porch, wrapped in a thick shawl, sipping mulled cider, watching the moon rise over the hills. A woman named Simone, 50, silver hair in a braid, soft voice that shook like thunder, sat beside me. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. When you married yourself, did it last? I looked at her. At the trees, at the stars pinned to the sky like declarations no one could take back. And I said yes, because I keep renewing the vow. Every time I say no when I used to fold, every time I speak when I used to silence myself, Every time I let someone walk away without begging them to stay. Every time I choose softness without apology. Every time I let myself bloom, even when no one is watching. That's the vow. That's the ceremony. And it's still going. The last gathering of the year was held in the rain. It wasn't supposed to be that way. I had checked the forecast religiously, mapped out the wind patterns, even consulted with a retired meteorologist who had once been a client, but none of it mattered. That morning, the sky simply opened, soft and steady, as if the universe had decided cleansing was non-negotiable. I stood at the center of a wide garden in the Berkshires, surrounded by makeshift tents, soggy candles, and 40 women who refused to go home. They came anyway, in cotton dresses and boots, in scarves that clung to their cheeks, in soaked velvet and wet hair and mascara they didn't bother fixing. I didn't cancel. I couldn't. These women weren't here for comfort. They were here for a moment that would not be erased again. So we began. Barefoot in the mud, no microphones, no chairs, just a circle beneath dripping trees. And the first to step forward was a girl named Adira, 19, skin like honey, eyes like they'd seen too much. She carried a pair of ballet slippers in her hands, dangling by the ribbons. "I stopped dancing when I was 11, she said. My aunt said I looked stupid in a tutu, that my thighs were too thick. I never danced again. Until last week." She knelt and placed the slippers on the wet earth. "I vow to move again. Not for anyone else. Just for me." The wind caught her voice like a hymn. Next came Miriam, 72, in a faded trench coat and red lipstick that refused to smear. I let a man silence me in the courtroom, in the kitchen, in the bedroom. For 30 years. I stayed. I smiled. I shrank. She held up a crumpled letter. This was my acceptance into law school. I never went. I kept this hidden under my mattress like a secret I couldn't afford. She kissed the paper and tucked it beneath a stone. I vow to be loud. Even now. Especially now. One by one. The women stepped forward, soaked and shaking and radiant. They placed their items into the growing altar, a wedding ring once flung into a drawer. A baby blanket from a child surrendered to the system. A pink tie that once belonged to a father who left without explanation. A cookbook that was never opened because someone else always decided the menu. They didn't ask permission to cry. They didn't wait to be invited into their own power. They just spoke. And when it was over, I stood before them holding the final bouquet, an unruly thing of wildflowers and thorned vines and blooms that had no name. "This is not about closure," I said, voice low and even. "Closure assumes the story ends. But stories like ours don't end. They unfold, and they bloom, and they carry us." I held the bouquet out into the rain, then laid it gently onto the altar. "And this," I whispered, "is the garden, not of beauty, but of return." That night, after the women had gone and the candles had been gathered, and the last note of silence had fallen like dew, I sat alone in my car, soaked to the skin, shaking from more than cold. I had no speech left in me, no clever caption, no poetic summary, just one truth, echoing. It had never been about the wedding. Not the one they canceled. Not even the one I gave myself. It was about the quiet that came after. The silence where I finally heard myself breathing again, where I stopped apologizing for wanting too much, for feeling too deeply, for staying soft in a world that valued steel. Weeks passed, then months. Life grew quieter again. The studio returned to normal rhythms, orders for holiday centerpieces, weddings blooming again after long postponements. I opened the doors each morning with calm hands. I no longer flinched when a bride said, "What if he leaves?" I just smiled and said, "Then you'll still have flowers. And maybe that's enough to begin again." People kept asking if I would turn the vow ceremonies into a movement, a brand, a platform. I said no. You can't brand belonging. You can't monetize what has no price. And you can't lead something that belongs to everyone. Instead, I created a guide. Free. Online. Simple. Just a quiet PDF titled How to Marry Yourself and Mean It. It included 3 things: an empty circle, for writing your name at the center, a space for a vow, not a poem, not a performance, just a truth, a question: where did you stop showing up for yourself and what might happen if you returned? That was it. No logo, no colors, just breath and white space. And it was downloaded over 100,000 times. One day in spring, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a simple card. Handwritten. "You don't know me. I'm a librarian in Minnesota. I watched your video on a night I had decided to give up. I didn't. I married myself instead. I wore green and stood by the river. I said, I promise to stop calling it too late. That was 6 months ago. I'm still here. Thank you for planting the seed." I folded the card, slipped it into the back of my vow book. I didn't cry. I just sat there, hands still, heart wide open. And then, one quiet Sunday morning, I walked back to the chapel, the one where I was supposed to be married. It hadn't changed much. The hedges were a little taller. The cypress still stood like silent sentries. The doors were locked, but I didn't need to go inside. I stood at the gate with a cup of coffee in one hand, the other wrapped around the strap of my satchel. I wasn't here to reclaim anything. I was here to leave a mark. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small tag. Pressed flower. Laminated. It read, "She showed up anyway." I tied it to the iron gate with a silk ribbon. Stepped back, took a breath, and smiled. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I was no longer the girl who needed everything to go right. I was the woman who knew how to keep walking when it went wrong, and that was enough.